Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So chapter 18, we've finished the personality chart last week, and last one being sattvic, rajasic, tamasic happiness. So we're to divine the sattvic happiness as poison in the beginning, nectar in the end. So what you don't like in the beginning, but is a little tough to do, but as it goes along, the path becomes smooth, as it's of the bigger value, something towards the self, the truth. Rajasic happiness, that which is more materially orientated, the focus is just to get something from outside. What can I get? Always focused on result, orientation, fruit, is frenzied. It seems nectarine in the beginning, but invariably it becomes neutralized and is poisonous, full of attachment. Rajasic happiness. Nectar in the beginning, poison in the end. And tamasic happiness isn't happiness really at all. It's delusive of itself. It doesn't even acknowledge itself. There's no higher values involved in that type of happiness. It's very soft, slothful, idle. It's full of opposite ideas to something universal. Heedless, reckless. So that's sattvic, rajasic, tamasic happiness. And you hopefully have made your chart of all of the different constituents of our gunas that we have, of our personality, from sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, renunciation, knowledge, action, steadfastness, intellect, finally happiness we've covered now. And now it's going to come onto the portion of what is this person? Who is this person? So we have the caste system traditionally in India or Asia. We actually have the caste system all over the world, whether we care to acknowledge it or not is a different matter. So we're going to start on verse 40, which begins explaining what this caste system is really about, and not that skewed, misconstrued ideas which many people hold. So let's start. We had a question. Sorry, is that you? So the question, Tim, if you'd like to read the question.
Excuse me, the question was, from your own experience in your own life, can you give an example of sattvic happiness?
So, anybody who wants to give it a shot first?
So in the morning, the resistance to get on my yoga mat or do my japa with my mala, I would rather want to just stay in bed rather than push myself and get myself on the mat. But when I'm doing my practice, so if I'm chanting my 108 mantras or doing my sequence, I actually feel the result of it is bliss in a certain way. So that's what came to my mind.
Anybody else? Thanks, Asia. What else? Tim?
Example that came to my mind is when you have to write, say, an article or a chapter, something like that. Writing is incredibly difficult. You have to put so much effort into it, and revision. And then once it's out there, once it's published, it is a form of sattvic happiness, and it also takes on an independent life. It's not really something I've written, it's just out there. So that is an example to me of sattvic happiness. The effort that goes into doing it then produces something that is quite independent of me.
Okay, good. Anyone else? So.
Yeah, just like what others have said, like with studying and having exams or meeting a deadline, I think you don't want to study because it's too much, or you feel demotivated. But once you actually study and finish, then it is sattvika because then you get good results, or you start to see the nectar, and you feel a sense of competence and yeah. So it's probably hard at the beginning, like kids don't want to study when the exams are coming up, but actually there's a sense of growth after that.
Okay. Anyone else? Vidya, go ahead.
Sattvic happiness for me is more service. When I do service, I find a lot of, I wouldn't say happiness, but I'm content. The days that follow that makes me feel more complete, so to speak. So I teach small children in my estate on Hinduism, and I teach them values and I teach them the stories around Hinduism. So the young ones, they've struggled to pronounce Sanskrit, but we kind of break it down and try and teach them. So it's really nice seeing them grow confident, and when they start reciting the mantras, they feel more confident about it. It's gratifying.
So we should come to your class. We'll have to pretend we're younger in age, but in spirit we're all young. Good. So it's not with the result per se, but it's where your thoughts are lying. So you know that your thoughts on something bigger. You feel that's right. It's a bit tricky in the beginning, holding that higher value, but when it just happens and you let it go and it comes right, then it infuses you to go further for that higher value. I feel that's right. So it's a nectar there. Remember, if you get attached to it, you'll become rajasic. So you've got to just keep with the flow. It's not just done and on with the next. So morning study, when you perceive something, you don't want to get up in the morning and look at those bigger values. But when you get into the habit of it, it becomes second nature that you won't let that go till you get to your destination. Sattvika. So sattvic happiness is the product of all those sattvic traits in the personality which go before it. Cultivating sattvic intellect, cultivating sattvic activities, service, being that actor, not focusing on the result or the past desire. So that whole combination makes that product of sattvic happiness. Happiness is the product of it in a way. What you get? Let's go. 40. So we're on the topic, the 4 castes and their duties. Class, caste, call it what you like. Very misconstrued. Let's chant 40.
न तद् अस्ति न तद् अस्ति पृथ्व्यां वा दिवि द्वेषो वा पुनः सत्त्वं प्रकृतिजैर्मुक्तं यथेभिः स्यात् त्रिभिर्गुणैः.
Sam, if you could read the verse. Okay.
Verse 40. There is no being on earth, nor even in heaven among the gods, who is free from these three gunas, qualities born of prakriti, matter.
So it's a very simple, straightforward verse. Every human being has these three gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And when you go beyond the gunas, guna atita, it means you're realized. So you've transcended the gunas. So our whole path is about how can we transcend out of tamas, rajas, sattva, get to that trans sattva and go beyond that. That's the whole practice. So all of us until self-realization have gunas, have a combination of gunas. And this is this whole sattva, rajas, and tamas in this portion of the Gita, it talks about it in other scriptures too, is a very unique contribution to the world of understanding. Because when you see an individual, you don't necessarily know if they're sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic on face value. Actually, the personality chart is about you evolving yourself and not evolving the others. Incidentally, you can give out this information like we're doing here, but what the others take is up to them, not you. So it's often like when I remember when we would do yoga, and the yoga teacher would always say, don't look at your neck, the person beside you, just look at you, what you're doing, because what the other person's doing won't help you. It's what you're doing will help you. But it's this very unique contribution to the world of understanding that ceiling, because currently it's predominantly tamas and rajas in the global world. So it gives you a comprehension of where you can break that ice, that ceiling. We all may do similar things, but we have different percentages of how we do it. Even when we have a cup of tea, we might all have it differently. So we're all a different combination of this sattva, rajas, and tamas. Some of us may have tea with we're a combination of or may have tea with no milk, but may have a alternative to milk. Some of us, you have Indian tea, it's predominantly milk. The tradition is, and it might have some spices, and it might have lots of sugar. Depending on the region, you'll have more sugar or less sugar. If you have Japanese tea, you might have no milk at all. If you have English tea, it's mostly water, a bit of milk. And depending on where your standing is, you might decide sugar or no sugar. So everywhere is a different combination of these three gunas. And it's just as we have the same tea, it's different everywhere we go, different combinations. So ours is to increase that sattvic content in ourselves, and inevitably you see the increase in the world. So from an ordinary person to a genius, there is sattva, rajas, tamas going on in different proportions until you're realized, all different varying degrees. So when there's a highly refined society, you'll see that sattva qualities coming through. And where there's a not so raised up society in its code of conduct, you see it. So let's read the verse, very straightforward verse.
Verse 40 through 44 cover the sixth topic. The topic relates to the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya,
Yes.
And
Shudra.
Shudra
Mm-hmm.
castes,
Yes.
and their corresponding activity. The classification is based on the Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika gunas qualities arising from their own nature. Verse 42 defines a Brahmana's activity. 43 covers that of a Kshatriya, and 44 Vaishya and Shutra. This verse declares that every being comprises all three gunas on earth or in heaven. Earth and heaven here implies that this truth has no exception. The Shatra scripture introduced the concept of heaven to indicate a higher mental state. Heaven is therefore no geographical place as misconstrued. Highly evolved spiritual persons are said to reside in heaven. Thus,
so it's a mental state. You're not going off to it at the end of life. You've done good deeds. You've got to do good deeds now, and then you know about it. If you not knowing about it, you better get serving some better deeds. That's all. You want your heavenly state. Got to work it. Let's go. Thus, even sages and saints.
Thus, even sages and saints display the Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika natures. Human beings in general clearly reveal this categorization. So do animals. A cow or deer seems to display sattva, whereas a tiger or lion expresses rajas, an elephant or buffalo tamas. The three gunas relate to prakriti, matter. Beings are constituted of the supreme self and matter. The self within enlivens matter equipments producing beings. The difference in the quality of matter components determines the wide range of beings. The self has no guna, quality. It is immaculate, unsullied by the gunas. The self acts like petrol in motor cars. Cars have a variety of engines. Their performances are distinct and different. The difference lies in the quality of engine comparable to matter equipment of being, while petrol remains the same force in cars like self in beings.
So we have gradations of beings. Some are more intelligent than others. Some are more refined than others. So the qualities, the gunas, make it so. But the self per se has no qualities, no gunas, but enables all to function. So here it's introducing now who's a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. There are 4 different types of human beings, and none of these human beings are by, none of these characteristics or castes are by birthright. They're purely by the proportion of sattva, rajas, and tamas one has and one acts out. It has nothing to do with birthright or taking up something or another. It's where your evolution of your mental temperaments are. This is where it's very misconstrued, because people determine it by birthright. You cannot do that. It's by what you do in your digested knowledge or wisdom, and you act out how you've evolved, where you're at in your evolution. So let's go. So it's always misconstrued in the wrong way. Hence, there's lots of controversy about the caste system. When people talk about it, there's lots of negativities around it. In actual fact, it's a very grand understanding and design of human life, of how you can evolve, or what you are, and understanding Yes. Tim.
Somji often uses petrol as an analogy for the self. And I wonder if the petroleum company BP, that BP stands for Beyond Prakriti.
Beyond matter. Hopefully. I'm not sure that it does. So we could even convert this example to electric nowadays as well, or many other things. So remember, any comparison has some parameters and it has a context. But if you want to remember BP has Beyond Prakriti, take it that way. If only it is, that'd be wonderful. So it's 41.
Brahmana Kshatriya Visham Shudranam cha parantapa Karmani pravibhaktani Swabhava prabhavair gunai.
Esha, if you could read that verse.
Verse 41. The actions of Brahmanas, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra, O Parantapa, are well classified by gunas, qualities born of their nature. Human being.
So gunas determined by your actions. Brahmana being the most refined, then Kshatriya, then Vaishya, and then Sudra. The four qualities born out of nature of the gunas. So the four varanas. So as I was saying, it's highly controversial and the whole thing's got mixed up. So it's all demonstrated by their mental temperament and actions. Nothing else. You can't claim it just like that. It's how your actions exhibit, how your thoughts exhibit in thought, word, and deed, how your behavior is. That determines what caste you are. And there's caste and class all over the world. Class generally tends to be based on the material in society, perhaps in some aspect, but traditionally also on cultural refinement. But generally, you might, in the Rajasic society that we are, it's generally based on material. But it's that refinement also in the traditional sense. So whether in heaven or earth is stretching, it's like, where's your mental state? It's a proportion of which guna you hold that determines your caste. So a sattvic person's considered to be a brahmana, a thinker. When that sattvic falls to more rajasic qualities, what would it be? Anybody familiar with this? What would you be when you've got more of a rajasic tendency coming in from the sattva? You're going to be more of less of a thinker and actor, more of a, anyone? Kshatriya. So you're more of an active, more of a ruler in the sense of leading in a way that is less from the thinking side, but it's just more of in the material. And when that goes even more, I mean, there's still an element of ruling and leading in Kshatriyas for the high. When that goes, it becomes more business orientated, trading, Vaishya. And when that goes, when the Rajas and Tamas draw in, and the Tamas becomes more, it's a Shudra, more of a labor orientated work where there's less thinking going on, less perception of what's going on forward, but more of a very physical labor force, as it were. And we're very much in that society now, where it's more thinking is not thinking, in fact, is more on terms of labor, work, on the menial tasks rather than the bigger values of society. So as sattva falls to rajas to tamas, so from brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, sudra, nobody really understands what's going on. But what you do see in societies, you can see it when you go to a place like India, in fact, generally, even where there's now rajas and tamas is crept in, but you can see an underlying value of sattva, where there's that refinement in the way people behave generally, there's an unselfishness. You can see that. So the spirituality gets maintained there in places where sattva is upheld. And at one stage, there were all brahmanas. There was no gradation required. But what happened was that there was a stage where it was all sattvika, and then there was infiltration of rajas and tamas. So the sattvika persons segregated themselves to maintain their sattva, just to maintain and help their thinking of how they could cultivate sattva in the whole of the society. And that's where the mix-up and misleading values have come along, because that segregation was never intentional to stay segregated. It was just to segregate, to integrate in the end. And that's where the misconceptions have come about of Brahmanas or X, Y, Z, and that eliteness of superiority complex comes in. But it was never that intention. So that's not really a Brahmana when you deliberately segregate to manipulate. It's only a segregation that you go to school or university to learn to actually integrate the whole with bigger values. Nisha, you had something. So it's a little bit of a mockery these days when you say you're a Brahmana. I know the people in my community I've grown up, it was very business community. Many of them, parents were born as Brahmanas, myself included. We used to have Brahm Samaj XYZ, there was nothing Brahmin about it. It was all business. So that's how it becomes a mockery. You can hardly claim Brahmin. Go ahead, you ask.
Yeah, my question is just how, is it not wholly dependent though on the world that you're born into? So for example, if someone's born into a world where they are struggling constantly to feed or to have shelter, their actions are going to be predominantly focused on that, rather than if someone is born into a world where they have basic needs met and therefore are able to have the time to cultivate a higher way of thinking. Is it not then dependent on just something that's out of our control, which world we're born into, which life we're given?
No, you always have a choice of action. Now, what your past actions are, or vasanas are, will project you into your present condition. So there may be aspects where you have vasanas that you've got to deal with. But essentially, if you have predominance of sattva, that's what you'll be in any predicament, whether you be in one country or another, one environment or another, you'll make that predominance of sattva, you'll cultivate it, if that's what it is. So you see, when you live in a society like we're living in, you might feel you need to get your basic needs met. But what are the basic needs? It's different for each individual. And what standard of living do you think you should have? Not you personally, but each one of us should have. So we feel it should be X, Y, Z. So we'll be ever struggling in that construct of I need to have X to feel Y. But the minute you feel it's within yourself, you don't need X or Y. You need X and Y only if you're going to distribute, because you've got to fit into the society. But before you do that, you've got to actually grow yourself, and you don't need X and Y. If you've got a strong enough vasana for the higher values, X and Y will come riding to you when you put in the effort. But you've got to put in the effort. So if you want the sattva, you've got to cultivate sattva. You've got to get out of the system that you're in and into this, what's required to cultivate sattva.
I think this is just an area where I really struggle with because of what I see in India, and that's just complete segregation. So yeah, I think I need to.
Segregation, sorry, I wasn't with you.
So sorry, just how, I mean, it just seems to be how it is in India with the whole caste system. I only see it being as complete separation between certain people, and I've never actually understood this. So this is something I need to just sit with quite a bit and study, because I only see it. Yeah,
you don't assume anybody looking like a brahmana is a brahmana. Or you don't assume not either. It's not actually one's business to get into what somebody else is doing. It's actually one's business to get into what you are doing and seek out where you can get that knowledge from and raise yourself. So the manipulation or the controversy is because everybody's claiming and making a mockery of this caste system of I'm this, I'm that, you're this, and you're that. So you can't. So it's been manipulated by the politicians and by the leaders of society. So there's nothing Brahmin about that. Or Kshatriya, the leaders of society have made a mess, they manipulate it. Because the society is largely, at whole globally, is not in a sattvic state. We're actually in a Kali Yuga, where all the different yugas, we're in the lowest, where it's all, you've got to really be very strategic in cultivating your sattva. Yeah. Sattva is not just being nice and passive and good. There's a lot more aggressive assertiveness to that refinement within, which percolates out. So if you're passive and good, the aggressively bad will manipulate you. So a Brahmana is a thinker, an assertive thinker, which looks in the interest of the whole, never with self-interest. When it's self-interest, it's not a Brahmana. So the segregation is where it's broke down. So anybody could become like looking in this day and age, like looking like a Brahmana. Whether east or west, it doesn't matter. You set up a university, you gain some credibility and some higher values. You look like a saintly person. It doesn't mean anything. It's actually what you'll do. There's debates and discussions going on with all sorts of nonsense about making decisions on the higher values, which never get made decisions upon. The world stays the same. That's not being a Brahmana, but society at best is doing that in the Kali Yuga. So really have to cultivate, make time for yourself. When you say basic needs are met, reduce your, it's a constant standardization of reducing the non-essentials of life and actually focusing on the essentials. And each individual has that choice of action. You choose where you want to be. Maybe past has brought you to certain things where you've got to resolve those desires, but you will inevitably choose with your intellect now where you're going to go. That's your choice. It doesn't mean to say you should be a pauper in doing it either. That's a smart Brahmana. Smart Brahmana knows how to distribute wealth. Tim, does it make sense?
Well, just to pursue Isha's question a little bit, it is difficult to become a Brahmana if you're born in an economic situation where there are no books, where there's no education, when you can't read, when you're struggling for survival. It's just difficult. You know, how can you develop sattva when there are no books and you can't read? It's just difficult. I think one can be a little bit dismissive of this when it is just an incredible struggle. The inequalities due to lack of education and lack of economic distribution make it difficult, surely.
Surely, yes, you're right. But then you go into, I mean, I'm just giving you examples of experience. You go I remember growing up when I was younger, you go into certain environments, villages or towns or play amongst certain people. They didn't have money. They didn't have many books, but their purity of heart is Brahmin through and through, because they look at the interest of the whole from within themselves. They already cultivated that vasana from wherever past, you might say. So their predicament is already like that, and they cultivate forward without any books or scriptures. So it's not necessary. The books and scriptures do, obviously, education helps you on your way, and you need that funds and you need those things. But a Brahmana cultivates that. A Brahmana is not somebody who gives everything up and does nothing. If you're a Brahmana in this society, you have to go according to the society and cultivate that availability for the interest of the whole. So it's difficult when you don't have access to this type of knowledge. And as we recognized in the personality chart, if you're in a predicament of Sat and Tamas, it's very difficult to step up to Rajas, because you're already in a spiral down and everything is hugging onto you in the negative values. But if you get a glimmer of Rajas, you can start there. And few is it that will pick up on the sattva in a very big way, especially in the environment, what the mahat is of today's society. You're quite right. But those who have this knowledge or care to cultivate it within themselves, then if they might see fit, if it's in their vasana set, might see fit as a Brahmana to distribute knowledge to the takers. Anybody who's a taker. If nobody's taking, move on. But your job is to distribute if you are that way inclined as a Brahmana. Not everybody's that way. So there is an inequality in society, but be unto you if you're the cause of it. So as a Brahmana, you develop your thinking, your strategic knowledge, and enable the world to have it, because the world's not separate from you. There is an equality. The whole world is basically in Shudra Vaishya. It's not thinking. And to even give that thinking, most people can't take it on board. They'll dismiss the thinking as something too deep and throw it out of the window for their own egotistical values. Can't take it on board. So if you are a Brahmana, go and put yourself with other Brahmanas. Cultivate that higher knowledge. Leave aside those people with, you can't solve the world's problems, but you can up your own refinement so it spills out and others can take from you. As a matter of fact, not because you're dictating, just as a matter of fact, let others take your spillover. So that means you have to do your work to have a spillover. Put yourself in that position so others can take. Brahman is a thinker and somebody who looks in the interest of the whole. It is tricky, but you can't solve everybody's problems. You have to choose your fights. You have to choose your environment, but as a human being, you have a choice of action. And if you're fortunate in the position to come across this type of knowledge, whichever place it is, then you can cultivate that higher value of sattva in yourself. It has a ripple effect. So a sattvic person Sattvic persons tend to be away from the destruction of the positive, but of the negative. They tend to have damage limitation, so they may well be vegetarian as a matter of course. They tend to cultivate that original thinking. East or west, it doesn't really matter on the self, on the truth. Whereas when that comes down, the rulers, the warriors, then it comes down to the Vaishyas, the business, trading. Right now in the world, it's trading and business, and it soon will be Shudras, just manual labor workers, will be the rulers. And then the whole thing goes back in a different cycle. So the 4 yugas. So as a projection, we had when I was studying, when Swamiji was giving class in this chapter, I just picked out of my class notes, maybe 20, 25 years ago, I saw this proportion, what he'd offered. And a Brahmana is 80%. I don't know, do you have? I sent it you on. I just quickly photographed it this morning, so apologies, it's just on my notebook. So these are from my class notes. So Brahmana, 80% Sattvic, 15% Rajasic, 5% Tamasic. So they're working on that to become Trans-Sattva, to get to realization. A Kshatriya, 20% Sattvic, look at the drop. 70% Rajasic, frenzied activity, always for the result, always more materially orientated, and 10% Tamas. A Vaishya, 15% Sattvic, it's a drop again. 60% Rajasic, very frenzied, very focused on the worldly things, trying to correct the world rather than correct themselves first, always result orientated. Tamas is growing, that slothfulness. And the Shudra, 5% Sattva. Can't think of bigger things really. It's always on the basic needs, very, very best, and it's always with self-interest. There's not the curiosity or imagination to look beyond. Rajas 10%, 85% tamas. So if you're in a state of tamas, the best thing you can do is get on to action, get on to doing something. You might not be able to think of any values, never mind higher values. So just get on to acting to build the momentum of your body, to maneuver yourself to something bigger. So that's a projection that was offered. So the division is maintained. Mm-hmm.
It seems odd to me that you've got 3 gunas, but we've got 4 types of people in society. It's more complicated than it need be. Should you not just have 3 types of people? You know?
What, who are more sattvic, more rajas? They're
the predominant. You could say there are 3 categories of people where the predominance is one of the gunas.
Well, it's just categorizing the stages of what human beings do. Thinkers, rulers and thinkers, to some degree, thinking more perhaps material, thinkers on something spiritual, which is more evolutionary, global, thinkers on something more material, but more active or ruling. Then it's business people. Nothing happens in the world without that business, trader, etc. And then there's the workers. You need the laborers to do stuff, get things done in one sense. So then there's a mass of people, but it's predominantly that, becoming that right now. So why? I don't know. I can't explain it. This is just how it is. They've got 4. So it's a division of the labor from thinker, spiritually, to materially, to actually the activities, the less of a thinker, but more of the trader, business transactions, the acquisition, and then the worker. That's the division. So if you could imagine everybody was in a sattvic state, as was said often in Quranic stories, in the Indus Valley, where the scriptures came out of, as such, that everybody was sattvic, brahmana. So there was no need to everybody. Somebody asked a question in one of the classes. There was no, okay, if everybody's sattvic, who's going to do the road sweeping? You're going to have a person to do it. But if everything is kept clean, that if everybody does their part, then you maintain your environment as a matter of part of your sattvic characteristics. If there's no need to fight because that conflict is resolved by thinking and discussion, no need for that warrior to fight. The monetary aspects were distributed well with the interest of everybody's development. So there's no need for business. So it goes on in such a state. So everybody's looking at what their gunas are and evolving that. And the Brahmana would then actually enable those values to be increased so everybody grows. It's not a elite class separate. It's a class of people who think for the whole because they're able to, because they themselves have refined themselves. So there's such a misconception, such a mockery, and such a misuse in the world, in places today. That is not the caste system. That's claiming a birthright over something which is not. It's purely based on gunas. So just imagine, or can you conceive, it's difficult to conceive a sattvic, everybody being sattvic. There's no need to give anybody anything because it's given. I acknowledge what you need, so I give it. You don't need to ask me. You acknowledge what's needed, so you give it. Because that's what you've got to do as your obligation. So that's sattva, to serve. Can you imagine if that was what it was? Because we're not in that state and we can see all the misuse, we project that first. But this is what it's trying to refine in us. Let's read it. There is a requirement, before we go, of education of this knowledge. There is a requirement. Without it, and there is a requirement to meet basic needs. So that's what we've got to cultivate in ourselves, and so others can have it. It is difficult to do it without, when there's an environment of tamas and rajas. But once you've got it in your mind, your intellect, your heart of hearts, there seems no other way. Let's go.
We're on verse 41, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Human beings fall under 4 distinct categories called varnas: Brahmana, Kshatri, Vaishya, and Sudra, based on their guna quality content. Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic gunas are the constituents of a human in different permutation and combination in beings. The proportion of the 3 gunas, varying from person to person, determines the class to which one belongs. A person with high sattva content, with little rajas and traces of tamas, falls under the highest cadre, brahmana, also known as Brahmin. When sattva becomes less, rajas predominates, and tamas a little, he is classified as a kshatriya. With still less sattva than a kshatriya, a drop in rajas, as well as an arise in tamas, he would become vaishya. Lastly, a person with traces of sattva, little rajas, and a predominance of tamas would be shudra.
Mm-hmm. So all on the gunas. Never get carried away by whatever, it's all on the gunas. So just look at, best thing is just to, as we are in the privileged place, we're learning this knowledge, just evolve ourselves. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. And whatever somebody says they are or not, don't worry. That's their set of values or gunas. You just get on with yours. Let it spill over. Okay.
The caste system is based on the three gunas, hence applicable to humans the world over. Brahmanas are original thinkers, the brains trust of a community. Kshatriyas compromise political leaders, rulers, warriors. Vaishyas, businessmen, traders, merchants. Shudras, workers, labour. These classes of persons spring from their natural temperament. The caste system, therefore, stems from an internal classification of human minds, not an external superimposition on society. There was a time when Brahmanas predominated and ruled the world. The world then was considered divine, classified in the Shastra, scripture, as Satya Yoga. Later, Kshatriyas outnumbered Brahmanas. They began to reign. Those were the days of chivalry, known as Treta Yuga. It was followed by the ascendancy of Vaishyas, who then controlled the fortunes of the world, brought in the age of capitalism. The Dvapada Yuga. In due course, the supremacy of Shudras' labour prevailed, marking the advent of Gal Yuga, the present-day world.
You can already see it happening. You just have to observe a little bit of what goes on in the world. You can see it just clearly. So to elevate yourself out of where it's at to sattva means you got to put in your study, reflection in the early hours of the morning. What is that truth to you? Reflect on it. What does it mean? Define it in as much as you can in a worldly sense of your one's own, and go for it. Dust off the things which hold you back. Keep going. Deal with the things which you need to keep going. Make it possible what you have to do. Can't afford the tamas and rajas. Got to really get onto it. There's nothing like early morning study reflection to kickstart that. It's not devoid of the basic needs that you need to have. You've got to cultivate that, but you're not dependent on that alone. It's mental state. I've seen it in the villages in towns in India where they have nothing. Yeah, they sit me first down to eat everything. They don't have anything much to eat. I've sat in places where they have little and they shared everything with you first. This is when I was younger, I wasn't involved in this. That attitude of that gracefulness of what's the word? Narayan's come, God's come into your household. You serve that person first. There's a refinement. There's a refinement of feeling you're most important. So when we have that in our hearts, that didn't come from any books. Yeah, we can use the books and scriptures and teachers to help us right on our way, but it's drawing what's existing from within. Let's stop here.